Hello and welcome to Weekly News Highlights. Let's begin with the keywords that made headlines this week. President Lee Jae-myung wrapped up this year's G7 summit by promoting global cooperation on economic growth, energy security, and AI, while deepening communication with world leaders on the Korean Peninsula. South Korea's benchmark KOSPI has reached another historic milestone, surging past 9,000 on strong gains in semiconductor stocks and growing optimism over the country's tech sector. The new leadership lineup at the National Assembly is setting the stage for battles over key committee posts and a high-stakes confirmation hearing for President Lee Jae-myung's Prime Minister nominee. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung met Pope Leo XIV at the Vatican, where the two leaders discussed peace on the Korean Peninsula and agreed to strengthen cooperation ahead of World Youth Day Seoul 2027. Our Blue House correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
Appearing in a black suit and gray tie representing respect for the Holy See, President Lee Jae-myung was given a welcome at the Vatican, along with First Lady Kim Hae-kyung. In their first meeting on Monday, regional peace was a key topic between the president and Pope Leo XIV.
The president explained to the Pope our people's desire and government's vision for peace on the Korean Peninsula, and reaffirmed the Vatican's unwavering support for peace and reconciliation on the peninsula.
Details were undisclosed, but there is a possibility that the president asked the Pope to pay a visit to North Korea in the future. The leaders agreed to closely cooperate for the success of World Youth Day Seoul 2027, during which President Lee invited the Pope to South Korea. The president also met Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's Secretary of State. The Korean leader presented the Pope with a sculpture representing God's embrace, referring to the prodigal son from the Gospel, and Cardinal Parolin with a desk set made using Korean traditional lacquer painting. The message of peace was also an overarching theme during a special mass on Sunday at the Basilica of St. Paul, with the president once again making it clear that the South does not seek reunification with the North by absorption.
정전 상태를 넘어 지속 가능한 평화 체제를 구축하기 위해서도 할 수 있는 모든 것을 다할 생각입니다.
The South Korean president also promised the country would play a greater role in the world during the special mass speech.
한반도의 평화가 세계 평화로 이어지고 세계의 연대가 다시 한반도의 평화를 굳건하게 만드는 선순환을 함께 만들어 가기를 희망합니다.
All this as the South Korean president sends a message of peace and solidarity as the world continues to face conflicts and tensions remain high on the Korean Peninsula. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, the Vatican.
President Lee Jae-myung called on U.S. President Donald Trump to help advance peace on the Korean Peninsula during a brief exchange ahead of the expanded G7 session.
World leaders are in the French town of Evian-les-Bains for the gathering of the world's most influential powers. Leaders from the G7 countries were present, including U.S. President Donald Trump, and 5 other leaders were invited, including South Korean President Lee Jae-myung. The host, French President Emmanuel Macron, greeted guests one by one.
How are you, Mr. President? I'm so happy. How are you?
The session began with a group photo during which President Lee met his American counterpart Trump for a short greeting. In the readout, the Blue House said Trump asked Lee about recent developments in inter-Korean relations, and Lee asked Trump to lead a peaceful resolution of issues relating to North Korea, noting Trump's contribution to the recent U.S.-Iran peace agreement. Trump reportedly responded positively. Tuesday's session addressed reforming current international development cooperation system, aiming to reduce financial dependency on external assistance and create pro-growth incentives. In line with that, the South Korean president stressed the importance of private capital, introducing a recent case where South Korea helped Indonesia secure private investment worth $50 million through its financial assistance in the agriculture and energy sectors. President Lee pitched his vision for a global AI-basic society, where the fruits of AI technology are shared with all countries, and he also brought up the need to bolster vocational training in developing nations. At the summit, the group of 7 leaders adopted 3 joint statements on mutually beneficial international partnerships, a coordinated response to recent Ebola outbreak, and the fight against cancer. Later in the day, the leaders joined a social dinner and a concert in the small French town, which sits on the southern shore of Lake Geneva.
President Lee says his attendance at the G7 for the second consecutive year demonstrates the trust and expectations of the international community, vowing to safeguard national interests and fulfill South Korea's responsible role on the global stage. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Geneva.
President Lee Jae-myung is back in Seoul after wrapping up his trip to France for the G7 summit, where he joined world leaders in discussions on the global economy, sustainable growth, and artificial intelligence. Our correspondent Song Yujin has this wrap-up.
The final day of this year's G7 summit began with the working session on reviving a balanced, shared, and sustainable economic growth for all. Speaking at Wednesday's session, President Lee Jae-myung said global economic imbalances should be tackled through dialogue and solidarity rather than blame. He also called for a stronger cooperation to strengthen the resilience of global energy supply chains as the war in the Middle East has fueled concerns over oil supplies and inflation.
President Lee proposed that energy importing countries, particularly those in the Asia-Pacific region, move beyond responding individually and strengthen practical cooperation through information sharing, early warning systems, emergency coordination, and efforts to stabilize oil and petroleum product supply chains.
The session was followed by a working lunch where world leaders and tech giants discussed artificial intelligence. President Lee emphasized the importance of narrowing the global AI divide while ensuring AI remains safe, transparent, and accountable. Korea endorsed 7 of the 8 documents adopted during the 2-day meeting of the G7 members and 5 invited countries. Leading up to the G7, attention was on whether President Lee would hold a bilateral meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump on the sidelines. Although no official summit took place, the Blue House said on Wednesday that the 2 leaders exchanged views on the Korea-U.S. alliance and the Korean Peninsula over Tuesday's gala dinner.
President Trump reaffirmed his strong commitment to playing whatever role is necessary to advance peace on the Korean Peninsula and said he would remain in close communication with President Lee on the matter.
Posting a photo of himself with Trump on X, Lee wrote that the two had a candid 90-minute discussion that produced meaningful progress. He added that President Trump had invited him and First Lady Kim Hae-kyung to play golf. After returning to Korea on Thursday, President Lee is expected to shift his focus back to domestic affairs. On Friday, he will chair a meeting with his top aides to review the country's summer emergency preparedness. 송유진, Arirang News.
The halfway point of the National Assembly's current term arrived earlier this month, ushering in new leadership at the Speaker podium and renewed clashes over who will chair key committees. At the same time, the confirmation process is getting underway in Parliament for the president's pick to serve as Prime Minister. And joining me now in the studio is our political correspondent, Moon Hye-ryun. Thank you so much for coming in today, Hye-ryun.
It's good to be here, Sujin.
Right, to start us off, what is the current status of the legislative leadership and how is that affecting the current atmosphere in the Parliament?
So the second half of the 22nd National Assembly's term officially commenced on June 5th, with the election of 6th-term lawmaker Cho Jung-sik as the new speaker. And since taking office, Cho has wasted no time. In the 10 days since his election, he has held a series of high-level meetings with senior government figures, making clear that he intends to set a brisk legislative pace. Last week, he received the Presidential Chief of Staff Kang Hoon-sik and outgoing Prime Minister Kim Min-seok at the National Assembly. They agreed that the Assembly needed to act swiftly on a parliamentary inquiry into the ballot paper shortage that disrupted the June 3rd local elections, an incident that drew widespread concern about the integrity of the voting process. Then on Monday, he met with Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chol, pressing the government to put a windfall of tax revenues generated by a boom in the semiconductor industry to effective use, with particular attention attention to persistent youth unemployment. Across all of these meetings, the Speaker has consistently signaled his intent to move legislation quickly, saying he will do his utmost to build an assembly that delivers real and tangible results for the public. He also made constitutional reform a signature goal in his inaugural remarks.
I see. And new leadership means also the start of negotiations over who gets to chair which committee. So how are those talks going?
So with the new Speaker's leadership now in place, the ruling Democratic Party and the main opposition People Power Party are beginning talks on how to divide key committee chairmanships. And the biggest point of contention is the Legislation and Judiciary Committee, which acts as the final gateway for bills before they reach a full floor vote, making its chair one of the most powerful positions in the Assembly. Formal negotiations began in earnest this week, with the DP arguing that the ruling party must chair the committee to ensure that livelihood and reform legislation moves without obstruction. The PPP, for its part, points to a long-standing convention. The largest party takes the speakership and the second largest takes the Judiciary Committee chair as a check on the majority's power. The rhetoric has sharpened quickly.
The PPP's demand for the Judiciary Committee chair is nothing short of declaring a strike on the public's livelihood.
If the president's words about the need for inclusivity and openness for all are sincere, then the ruling party should first give up the Judiciary Committee chair.
Beyond the Judiciary Committee, negotiations over the chairs of committees covering financial regulation, trade and industry, and science and broadcasting are also expected to lead to friction.
Right, and there's also a Prime Minister confirmation coming up. So where does that stand now?
So earlier this month, President Lee nominated Han Sung-suk, who was the former Minister for Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, to succeed outgoing Prime Minister Kim Min-seok. On Monday, the DP and the PPP agreed on the membership of the 13-member Special Confirmation Committee. The hearing is set to take place on June 25th and 26th, as under current law, the hearing must be concluded by June 30th, 20 days from the date the request was submitted. The issue expected to dominate the hearing is the nominee's property holdings, with the PPP to question whether that record is consistent with President Lee's stated preference for limiting the influence of multiple homeowners in housing policy. The DP, however, will focus on her policy experience and administrative qualifications, highlighting the fact that she already underwent extensive vetting when she previously served as the Minister of SMEs and Startups.
So it looks like there is still a lot to keep an eye on at the National Assembly. So thank you so much for the wrap up today, Tanya.
Thank you for having me.
A former U.S. national security official says North Korea could once again become a major focus of Washington's nuclear diplomacy as the United States moves beyond a ceasefire with Iran and into a new phase of negotiations. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Oh Seong reports.
With a preliminary Iran deal now in place, Washington's next agenda may be North Korea's nuclear program. That's according to Fred Fleitz, a former Trump National Security Council official and longtime intelligence analyst. Fleitz said the agreement provides a pause in fighting, but not yet a settlement on Iran's nuclear program.
I think this was an important diplomatic achievement by President Trump and his team. To be clear that this is an agreement, but then the hard part starts. There's going to be a 60-day process of intense negotiations on other elements of a final agreement, especially the disposition of Iran's nuclear program, highly enriched uranium that is buried in the country, and other elements for a final settlement.
Fleitz has long warned that determined proliferators can use diplomacy to secure concessions without abandoning their nuclear ambitions. His new book, North Korea, Nuclear Brinkmanship and the Oval Office, looks at how Pyongyang continued to build its nuclear arsenal throughout decades of diplomacy.
We now know we believe North Korea has at least 50 nuclear bombs. And that happened because the world didn't do enough to stop it from getting them. Now with Iran pursuing nuclear weapons, it sort of shows how if we weigh in right now with Iran, we can stop it from becoming another North Korea.
He also points to North Korea's growing partnership with Russia, making it harder for the US to negotiate with the regime.
But the North Korean nuclear weapon program has still gotten more dangerous over the last few years. I think because Joe Biden did not have a competent North Korean policy, but also North Korea has become so close to Russia to assist Putin in his war against Ukraine. It's simply benefiting so much economically and also in terms of technology for its missile program, for submarines. Negotiating with the North now will be much harder.
Even so, Flights believes renewed engagement remains possible.
I think Trump's still going to push for that. There actually was a tweet over the weekend. I think Trump's thinking that with the Iran war maybe being wrapped up, he can focus on North Korea. I think that would be the right way to go. I think if there are talks, the U.S. will enter them without preconditions, and he will try to do what he can to get Kim to agree to a process to denuclearize the country.
For Flights, North Korea and Iran pose the same test for Washington, ensuring engagement slows their nuclear ambitions rather than buying them more time. Seong, Arirang News.
The South Korean government plans to widen civilian access along the inter-Korean border by easing military controls and redesigning large portions of restricted land. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
The Defense Ministry has rolled out plans to ease civilian restricted buffer zone boundaries along the border with North Korea. The Civilian Control Line, or CCL, is a buffer zone controlling civilian access for military operations within 10 kilometers south of the military demarcation line. It is currently set at an average of 8 kilometers south of the NDL, but there have been calls for changes from inconvenienced residents. Thus, it will be reduced to an average of 6 kilometers, moving upward by an average of 2 kilometers. The adjustments will start next year and will be covered by the defense budget.
We will reinforce control measures, such as relocating CCL checkpoints and installing fences and CCTV, and gradually adjust the civilian control line starting in 2027.
Adding to the CCL plans, the ministry also aims to lift restrictions on approximately 450 square kilometers of the restricted protection zone, that is around 150 times the size of Yeouido, to allow private property development.
We will revise the designation criteria for restricted protection zones south of the MDL, currently applied uniformly even to low-importance areas, to minimize operational and management burdens while enabling regional development without compromising military operations.
The ministry will start the review process in the second half of this year. Through the adjustment of the CCL and the redefinition of restricted protection zone criteria, the total area will amount to about 240 times the size of Yeouido. Now, with more public access to military-controlled zones expected, one expert said there should be thorough measures to deal with potential problems.
Civilians and soldiers will now be mixed together. So the first issue is how to classify and control them. The second is the plan to introduce AI and other advanced technologies. Specifically, what kinds of advanced technologies, and in the case of AI, what types of AI are actually being considered.
The ministry will also remove military structures considered to have lost tactical utility from 23 locations in border regions. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
South Korea's benchmark KOSPI hit a historic milestone on Thursday, briefly climbing above the 9,000-point level for the first time ever, driven by strong gains in tech and chip stocks despite ongoing global uncertainties. Our business correspondent Park Jun-an has more.
Korea's benchmark KOSPI has rewritten history. On Thursday, the KOSPI surged past 9,000 milestone, logging a jump of more than 115% in 2026 alone. With Korea's growing role in the global tech industry and rising optimism across the sector, it took only 22 trading days for the index to climb from 8,000 to 9,000. The undisputed heavyweights are the Korean semiconductor giants. Especially, SK hynix has seen its shares skyrocket, surging over 300% this year. Adding to the momentum, SK hynix on the same day announced that it has already supplied samples of its next-generation 12-layer HBM4E chips to major clients.
Recently, expectations surrounding SK hynix have strengthened amid reports of a potential ADR listing and discussions over a share buyback and retirement program worth up to 100 trillion won. As a result, the company's stock has significantly outperformed. In addition, the prevailing view in the market is that the semiconductor industry will remain in a strong upcycle through this year and next, further supporting investor confidence.
Behind the KOSPI's rally, retail investors have been a major driving force. On the macroeconomic front, the easing of geopolitical tensions has played a crucial role. In particular, the recent report of an end-of-war draft MOU between the United States and Iran. With the expected reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, crude prices have cooled to the $70 range, effectively easing inflation fears. While global investment banks are already eyeing the 10,000-point milestone, experts urge a degree of caution.
The KOSPI's rapid rise in a short period of time has raised concerns over heightened market volatility. Even minor negative developments could trigger sharp shifts in trading flows, amplifying market swings as investors rush to either buy or sell.
With heightened optimism surrounding Korean markets, the KOSPI's 10,000-point milestone is now emerging as the market's next destination. However, volatility stemming from global uncertainties, interest rate concerns, and shifting investor sentiment remains a key risk that could challenge those expectations. Park Jun-an, Arirang News.
Global oil prices have eased on optimism surrounding a ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran, but Korean drivers are still paying steep prices at the pump. Kim Jin-ho reports.
Optimism over a U.S.-Iran ceasefire has seen a drop in global oil prices, but gasoline prices in Korea remain stubbornly high. Despite the ceasefire agreement being only an interim one, global oil prices fell immediately. By Wednesday, both Brent and WTI crude dropped below $80 a barrel for the first time in more than 3 months. Yet lower gasoline prices are still some time away for drivers in Korea. At this gas station in Seoul, known for offering relatively low prices, gasoline still costs more than 2,000 won, or approximately $1.32 per liter. Korea's nationwide average gasoline price was around 1,600 won per liter before the Middle East war, but began climbing after the conflict broke out. Since mid-April, prices have remained above the 2,000 won range. The government has kept a price cap on gasoline for more than 3 months as part of efforts to ease the burden on households. Even so, drivers continue to feel the strain of high fuel prices.
Gasoline prices are just too high. I drive long distances for work, so fuel costs have become a major burden. I spend nearly twice as much on gas as I used to.
I never imagined diesel prices would climb this close to 2,000 won a liter. It reminds me of past economic crises.
Lower global oil prices don't reach drivers overnight. It typically takes 2 to 3 weeks for crude to be shipped, refined, and distributed, while much of the fuel now being sold was bought at higher prices. Experts say crude would likely need to fall back to around $70 a barrel before drivers see lower prices at the pump. With energy and logistics supply chains still taking time to normalize, the government says it remains focused on keeping inflation in check. Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chul convened a task force meeting on consumer prices on Thursday, pledging continued efforts to ease inflationary pressure.
Raw material costs continue to weigh on prices, and uncertainty remains high. We will do everything we can to protect household budgets and stabilize consumer prices.
The government also laid out additional support, including subsidies for fuel costs and expanded discount programs to help ease the cost of living. Kim Jun-ho, Arirang News.
Korean food, beauty products, and K-pop are drawing huge crowds in Paris this week as Korea and France mark 140 years of diplomatic relations with a cultural showcase aimed at deepening ties and expanding business opportunities. Our Park Gun-woo shows us how.
To get a bowl of Korean ramen and tteokbokki, you need to join a long queue in France. At least that's the case this week at K-Expo, being held as Korea and France celebrate 140 years of diplomatic ties.
One of the fastest ways to understand a culture is through its food, and here at the K-Expo, people just don't see Korea, they taste it. From instant tteokbokki, spicy ramen, to seafood specialties from Korea's coastlines, this food zone is bringing Korean flavors straight to Paris.
We can experience really, I think, the whole culture. I feel like there's more and more exhibitions and fair about Korea, mostly in Paris, but maybe it should be not only in Paris.
Demand was so high that some food booths ran out of products hours before closing time. At the beauty zone, visitors lined up to try Korean skincare products and receive personalized consultations.
If I wake up tomorrow and my skin feels good, I will try to find the product or a similar one. There's a lot of shops in Paris, so it's really easy to find the K-beauty products here.
The energy continued in the evening with the K-pop concert featuring 6 acts, including Monsta X and NCT Wish, drawing thousands of fans. A2 Major also held a mini fan meeting, giving fans a chance to meet the group up close.
I tried my chance to go to the fan sign, but sadly I wasn't selected. So I just came here to see them because even though I wasn't chosen since I really like them a lot. I just seeing them is already a lot for me.
For organizers, the event is about creating stronger cultural ties between the two countries.
I hope this serves as an opportunity for young people in France to gain a deeper understanding of Korean culture beyond what they've seen so far. As the government and private sector continue to expand exchanges, I believe that by the time we celebrate the 150th anniversary, Korea and France will feel less like distant countries and more like close neighbours.
The cultural exchange is also generating business opportunities. Organizers have set a business consultation target of $400 million, connecting Korean companies with European buyers and turning cultural interest into economic opportunity. Business meetings continue through Friday as Korea looks to further expand the global reach of K-culture into business partnerships. Park Gon-woo, Arirang News, Paris.
That brings us to the end of Weekly News Highlights. Thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your weekend.